The senator from North Dakota.
Are we going to quorum call?
We are not.
All right. Mr. President, I rise to pay tribute to my colleague, but most of all, my friend, Senator Lindsey Graham. We were all shocked to learn of his passing this weekend, and I mean it, stunned. It's hard to imagine the Senate without Lindsey. It already seems quieter. We'll miss his humor, his advice, and, of course, his friendship. Lindsey was dedicated to serving the people of South Carolina and the nation, spending nearly his entire adult life in public service, from the military to the South Carolina House to the past 31 years here, both in the House and in the Senate. Having spent 33 years in the Air Force, South Carolina Air Guard, or the Reserves, Senator Graham was a staunch supporter of our men and women in uniform. Since 2010, he served as co-chair of the National Guard Caucus. And with his help, we were able to successfully convince the Department of Defense to change its policy and allow guardsmen and reservists to concurrently serve their federal tuition, to receive their federal tuition assistance and their GI Bill benefits in full. Given our close personal friendship and his ardent support of our service members and our national defense, our military, I like to call him Grambo. For me, that was his nickname, Grambo. You know, kind of like Rambo. Well, he was Grambo. And he really was the Senate version of Rambo in all things military. And he was relentless, as we saw. I mean, right up until almost the day he died, he was working and advocating for our military on behalf of American military strength and our role as truly the leader of the free world. As chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, Senator Graham advanced conservative causes that have made our nation stronger and more prosperous. He helped steer through the Working Families Tax Cut, the One Big Beautiful Bill, or the OB3. It's got a lot of names, but the important point is it really made a huge difference for our country, for working families. And he cared about that. He cared about taking on the big challenges, doing big things. And likewise, as budget chair, he was instrumental in helping us fund border security and law enforcement. He was a big part of helping us implement the Trump agenda, and that was so appropriate. Lindsey was really, you know, as they say in sports, he was a triple threat. He was a triple threat. He was a force in our Republican caucus. He could work with the Democrats, and of course, he had a tremendous relationship with President Trump. And they truly cared about each other. They were real friends. They worked together, but they truly were friends. And we'll miss all of that. As former chairman and a senior member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Graham shaped the federal judiciary. And think of how impactful that has been, from the Supreme Court down to the district court. He played a central role in the confirmations of Supreme Court justices, including Justices Alito, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Barrett, while also helping to oversee a massive conservative shift in federal policy. I think the time that on the Judiciary Committee, he really said what he thought, what he felt in his heart about Justice Kavanaugh was perhaps, if not his finest moment, one of his truly finest moments, where he truly stood up and said what he felt was right on the national stage and made an incredible difference, a lasting and important, incredible difference. And it wasn't rehearsed. It was just Lindsey spontaneously being Lindsey, saying what he was in his heart. That old saying, speak from your gut with your heart. And boy, did he. And it made a huge difference. And that was vintage Lindsey Graham. His leadership on defense, judiciary, and budget issues will be felt for years to come. But for all his accomplishments in the Senate and around the globe, Senator Graham was most proud of his family. He was a loyal and loving brother and uncle who once said of his sister, quote, "Of all the things that have happened in my life, Her turning out so well is the highlight of it by far, end quote. And it is only fitting that his sister Darline will serve in his place. We extend her a warm welcome to the Senate, like Senator Graham did with so many of us. And it's almost as if Lindsey and President Trump had one more call after the call that night where they talked. Lindsey had gotten back from Ukraine, and the president called him, or he called the president. They talked on the phone, and it was shortly after that that Lindsey had his heart attack and died. But it's almost like they had one more call where Lindsey was able to call President Trump again, or President Trump was able to call Lindsey, and they talked about, who should replace Lindsey during that period before the election when the people of South Carolina will elect their next senator to replace Lindsey, and they decided on Darline, and how fitting, how appropriate. And so big thanks to President Trump for recommending to Governor McMaster that he appoint Darline. We're so pleased to have her here, and it's so fitting and appropriate. My wife, Mikey, and I are praying for Lindsey and for his whole family, and I have to say that my wife, Mikey, was always a big Lindsey fan. And one time, she just tells, we're at dinner or something, she just tells Lindsey how much I liked and respected Lindsey. So I said to her later, why did you do that? She goes, well, because you do. You really like him, you respect him. So I said, yeah, I know I do, but he's my buddy. You're not supposed to tell your buddy that. They're just supposed to know it. But it's true. I think we all did, both sides of the aisle. And so we will miss him incredibly. The country, the state of South Carolina will miss him. Our country will miss Lindsey Graham and his incredible service. May God bless Lindsey and his entire family. Thank you, Mr. President.
The Democratic Whip.
From North Dakota for those kind words about our mutual friend. We're both going to miss him. I've given a tribute to him today in the committee and partially on the floor, but it's still hard to imagine the Senate without Lindsey. Mr. President, I'd like to speak on a separate topic. In 1935, President Franklin Roosevelt decided to try something. The idea was to create a pension plan for every American. Why? Because many people, despite working hard their whole lives, doing their best to save money, ended up almost penniless when they retired or they were forced to quit working. Those were the days when grandma or grandpa moved into the spare bedroom in your house. If that didn't happen to you, ask your father or even grandfather. They'll remember those times. So Franklin Roosevelt says, let's create a pension system so that after you retire, there'll be some money coming in. You pay into it all your working life, but when you reach the age of retirement, you get a benefit from it. They called it Social Security. It was passed into law in 1935. It made its first payment 5 years later in 1940. I think it has become arguably the most important social program in America. Certainly more Americans are participating in Social Security than almost any other program. And they should. They earned it. They worked for it. They were promised. The promise should be kept. And how is Social Security doing? Well, that's why I'm standing here before you today. Last month, the Social Security Board of Trustees released an alarming report about the status of Social Security finances. That board found that Social Security will be unable to make full payments to eligible Americans by 2032. That's not that far away, 6 years. This is alarming, and it's a call to arms to Congress. I was elected to the House of Representatives in 1982. Scared to death that I was going to be a one-term congressman. I was looking over my shoulder every 5 minutes about what's going to knock me out of my perch here. Well, they came in and said, there's news for you, new congressman. Social Security is about to go broke. The year was 1983, and we could see in the short term Social Security unable to make its benefit payments. That would have been a disaster in '83. We rose to the occasion. We had a Republican president, Ronald Reagan. We had a Democratic House of Representatives with Tip O'Neill, and we set out to write a change in Social Security that would save it so it could keep making payments. Well, it took a long time, took several months, but we got it done, and we passed it. Our goal was to buy 50 years of solvency for Social Security, make changes to the program so that it would last, keep paying its benefits as promised for 50 years. That was 1983. I voted for it. Democrats and Republicans all voted for it. To my knowledge, not a single member of Congress lost re-election over that vote. People said we had to do it. There was no question about it. It was a tough vote, but it was the right vote. It was 1983, 50 years of solvency. Where does it take you? 2033. And what's the situation we're just told? This program that we value so much is going to last to the end of 2032. It worked. 50 years of changes worked. And now the question is basically this. Can we respond with the same bipartisan effort to buy 50 years more solvency in Social Security? I think we can. Social Security, unable to make its payments in 2032, is an alarm bell. It's a call to action for Congress, both political parties, not just Democrats, Republicans as well. Social Security is the bedrock promise of secure retirement and has been over 90 years in America. Americans pay into the system throughout their careers of hard work, and come the time, that same program is supposed to be there to give them peace of mind when they seek retirement. But we know we have 6 short years to achieve that. And what's going to happen at the end of that 6-year period? The Board of Advisors tells us Social Security will only be able to pay 78% of benefits. Translate that, Durbin, put it in English. That means the average senior citizen faces monthly benefit cuts of $450. $450 a month cut from Social Security. For some, that's quite an inconvenience. For others, that's quite a disaster. It would force many seniors to choose between purchasing groceries, paying their utility bills, or filling their prescriptions. Honest to goodness, it's that basic. 70 million Americans, including seniors and people with disabilities, rely on Social Security to afford the basics in life: food, medication, housing, utilities, and so many more things. In my home state of Illinois, more than 2 million people receive Social Security. 20% of Illinois seniors rely on Social Security for virtually all of their income. That's it. That's Social Security check. If Congress sits on its hands and does nothing to respond to this crisis, millions of Americans will be expected to make ends meet with fewer and fewer dollars each month. The fact of the matter is that Congress has known about this issue of insolvency for quite some time. But year after year, Congress has avoided confronting the question, instead kicking the can down the road for a future Congress to show the courage to step up and save the program. That is unacceptable. We owe it to our seniors, we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our reputation. We know that the longer we wait, the more drastic the policy changes become. We owe it to every American to save Social Security. Today I'm doing something that is rarely done in the Senate, introducing a bill sponsored by a bipartisan group of senators, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans. Our goal is to protect and strengthen Social Security. Our bill is called the Promise Act. It seeks to create a fair, bipartisan process to assure Congress finally debates and votes on the future of Social Security. Under our proposal, the Independent Bipartisan Social Security Advisory Board would collect public input and send a proposal to Congress that would keep the trust fund for Social Security solvent for 50 years at least. That would kickstart a process in both the House and the Senate to do something we rarely do around here. It's called legislating, writing a law. passing a law. Under our bill, Congress would have the opportunity to hold hearings, offer amendments, debate competing proposals, and ultimately vote on them. You say at this point, okay, Senator Durbin, what is this plan to save Social Security? That's the beauty of this proposal. We create an opportunity for alternative plans to be offered. And the one with the most votes, as long as it gets 60 votes in the Senate, the one with the most votes will prevail and be the work product of the Senate on Social Security. Our legislation does not lower the 60-vote threshold in the Senate, nor does it predetermine any specific outcome. It may not work. We may not be able to put together any bill that gets 60 votes. But goodness gracious, we were sent here to try, weren't we? It simply guarantees the American people, through their elected representatives, are finally going to have an open, transparent debate. I've gone to members of the Senate on both sides of the aisle and said, what we want to do is give you your day in court, give you your day in the Senate. You bring your best idea, and the parliamentarian looks at it and says, there's proof here that this has at least 50 years of solvency for Social Security. You can offer this amendment, Senator. Give it your best. Members would be able to offer substitute proposals provided that it's at least 50 years of Social Security solvency. Let me say that another way. Every member with a serious proposal for the most important social program in America would have the opportunity to bring their idea to the table, to the floor, and get a vote. That's so rare around here. It restores the Senate to debating, amending, and voting under regular order compared to what we see today. Many of my colleagues have been working on proposals for a number of years. Many are broadly popular. I'll note that the senior senator from Ohio, a Republican, and the senior senator from Massachusetts, a Democrat, recently shared their idea to shore up the program, a bipartisan plan. They may offer an amendment to do just that. Congress has no shortage of ideas. We simply have a lack of will. On both the left and the right, many stakeholders would rather wait for that perfect political moment. Well, that's a mistake. I worry that moment will never come, and Americans will suffer because of that calculation. The Promise Act finally creates a pathway for those ideas to receive the consideration they deserve. Americans sent us to Congress not to observe the problems, but to solve the problems. And that's what I'm trying to do with the Promise Act. There is no greater longer-term challenge before Congress than preserving Social Security. No excuses. We can do it this year. So I urge my colleagues to support this bill, to set up the process, the procedure, to bring it to the floor and to have alternative substitutes for Social Security's future offered for consideration, for debate, and for a vote. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. Finally, kickstart the process of tackling this important issue. We'll be working to pass this measure before we depart for the August recess. Is it a long shot? Maybe it is. But I think when we understand the gravity of the challenge and the important responsibility we shoulder when we accepted this position as senators, we'll understand that we have to rise to that challenge. The 8 of us, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, are willing to step up and say, let's move forward. Let's not be afraid to legislate. Let's do it for the good of Social Security and the millions and millions of Americans who count on it. Mr. President, I yield.
Mr. President.
The senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to enter into a colloquy with the senator from North Carolina, Senator Tillis.
Without objection.
Mr. President, 4 years ago, Congress passed our legislative response to one of the deadliest school shootings in American history. It happened in Uvalde, Texas, at the Robb Elementary School. 19 innocent children and 2 adults, teachers, lost their lives that day. It was a devastating occurrence. Unfortunately, it was not an isolated event. Americans around the country, though, joined in the suffering that these families experienced as they mourned the loss of their loved ones. Flags at federal buildings and military installations were lowered to half-staff. We all knew we wanted to do whatever we could do to prevent something like this from happening again if there was anything that we could actually do legislatively. The much harder question was, what would that look like? In the days that followed, we heard from many Americans, Texans, North Carolinians, and folks all around the country saying no parent should ever have to send their child to school wondering, will that child be safe? And no child should have to go to school wondering if they were going to be the victim of a mass shooting. We knew that whatever we did, it would not bring back those teachers and innocent children from the act of pure evil that unfolded on May the 24th, 2022. But we knew that Senator Tillis, Senator Sinema, Senator Murphy, and I took on the task of trying to come up with a bill that would actually make a difference, that would save lives. But we knew we had to do it consistent with the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. But we felt like we could make some progress and save lives. As negotiations continued, there was pressure mounting from some corners of this chamber to do things that maybe sounded pretty good, but they wouldn't actually change the results, or maybe they would be unconstitutional and depriving law-abiding citizens of their Second Amendment rights. During the meetings that we had together, I think we concluded that if we actually wanted to be successful in doing something that would make a difference and save lives, that we would have to, we couldn't just try to do something that perhaps was a good press release or might make the evening news. We actually had to do something that would be meaningful and that would result in saved lives. I've long been a champion of Second Amendment rights. That's probably no surprise. Texans believe in the Second Amendment. But some of these proposals obviously were unacceptable to me personally, but they, as I said, failed to address the problems that we've seen in these school shootings in a way that would be meaningful. The best solution, in my view, was that we needed to find some way to come to grips with the mental health crisis in our country, and particularly that affecting young people, and in this case, in the wake of COVID and the isolation many of these young people had. But we also knew that we needed to be narrow and specifically tailor policy changes that would save those lives. So we worked together and passed a bill called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which passed the Senate on June the 23rd and was signed into law June 25 of 2022, 32 days after the shooting. Now, the Senate does not ordinarily operate at that sort of speed, I can assure you, as we all know. But we wrote this law carefully and deliberately to ensure that no law-abiding citizen's Second Amendment rights would be impaired. To be plain, if you didn't suffer from a mental illness or you weren't a criminal, you would not be affected by this law. That was true then, and it's true today. What this bill did do is made a historic investment in mental health and school safety and common sense measures to prevent dangerous individuals from being a harm to themselves and others. Texas, like all the states, has received significant amounts of money, in the case of Texas, hundreds of millions of dollars from this law, more than $312 million to date, to strengthen our mental health care and school hardening, to make it more difficult for violent individuals to attack soft targets like schools typically have been. But no more. Universities use these resources to partner with local school districts to provide training for mental health professionals to support students. And school districts use these resources to upgrade their security systems, to implement threat alert systems, and improve emergency response plans. I saw some of these firsthand when I visited R.L. Pascal High School in Fort Worth, which received more than $350,000 for specialized emergency radios and safety upgrades. The BSCA, as it's called, also expanded certified community behavioral health clinics around the country, which has allowed mental health clinics to expand their coverage to include not only mental health but substance abuse disorders. We have all come to be aware of the fact that we simply have not treated or provided the resources for people suffering from mental health challenges that are necessary to help them not only get better, but prevent them from descending into self-harm or harm to others. There are now more than 500 community-based mental health centers operating in 46 states, and additional states have added to the CCBHC demonstration program recently announced by the Health and Human Services Secretary, Secretary Kennedy, that was directly linked to this law that we passed 4 years ago. Now, of course, there's been a lot of misunderstanding in this living in the world we live in with social media and office holders and would-be office holders running in political campaigns. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what this law did and what it did not do. For example, some have described this bill as a gun control law, which it is not. So today, together with my colleague, our colleague, Senator Tillis of North Carolina, who was a great partner in this legislation, we want to address some of the widespread misconceptions about the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act and to set the record straight. One of the things I heard most in the recent campaign I ran in was that we had passed a red flag law, which would make it possible for an aggrieved partner or spouse or family member or maybe even a neighbor to basically turn in somebody and have their firearms confiscated without due process of law. We decided up front that although some states did have red flag laws, that number one, it was important that there be appropriate due process requirements before they could access any of the resources in this law, and secondly, that there not be a national red flag law and leave this up to the states. The truth is the BSCA actually makes it harder to implement red flag laws because you can't do so and access this money unless you enhance the due process protections that are necessary to protect what is a constitutional right. Our legislation created this due process framework that I know you'll hear more about from Senator Tillis. But I knew that my state, Texas, would never pass a state red flag law. And the last thing I was going to do is to support or embrace a red flag law, a national law that would preempt Texas law. So we wanted to make sure that the funding that was available for crisis intervention programs, veterans courts, mental health courts, just to use a couple of examples, that did not have those red flag laws, while making sure those states that did could not gain access to this money unless they provided an enhanced due process procedure. So it's false to argue that the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act created an incentive for more states to pass new red flag laws. And the statistics bear it out. Only 4% of the total money appropriated were obligated to red flag related activities, 4% in states with existing red flag laws, and those states now had to comply with the law, so a stricter due process standard applied. The vast majority of BSCA funds have gone instead to state mental health programs, veterans courts, as I mentioned, crisis intervention, school safety measures. The only states to implement a new red flag law were two states that already had those, had begun the process to pass one before the BSCA passed. So the BSCA, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, did not cause or lead any state to pass new red flag laws. What we did is made it harder for those laws to be abused in those states that had them by providing for this enhanced level of due process protection of this Second Amendment constitutional right. Another misconception I heard on the campaign trail or saw on social media was that we somehow created a mandatory waiting period before somebody could access a firearm if they were going into a store to purchase it for those under 21. Once again, this is false. Many individuals who create acts of violence like school shootings have a history of violence and are known to local law enforcement and are essentially ticking time bombs. That's what happened in Uvalde, Texas 4 years ago. The Uvalde shooter was a deeply troubled young man known by everybody in the neighborhood to be troubled, and there were warning signs that I think demonstrated the fact that he was not only a potential danger to himself, but also others. He was isolated and bullied, he self-harmed, had a history of fighting, threatening fellow students, and abusing animals. He bought weapons and ammunition within days of turning 18 because the juvenile records in Texas were not uploaded into the National Instant Criminal Background Check System like they are for adults. So there was virtually no possibility of any record of this potentially derogatory or disqualifying information that would have been available at the time of his purchase. If a person's record includes disqualifying criminal convictions or mental health adjudications, it shouldn't matter whether it occurred a day before their 18th birthday. And what the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act allowed law enforcement officials to do is to go back and look at those juvenile records. That information must now be available on the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. And the BSCA incentivizes states to upload these juvenile records, but it places a strict time limit on how long the review process can take place. If a determination is not made in that window, the purchase proceeds. Interestingly, far less than 1% of firearms background checks are affected by the checks for under 21-year-old buyers that this bill deals with. But yet we know that it has made a real difference. There was the 18-year-old attempting to purchase a long gun in Nebraska who, as a minor, made terroristic threats and was placed in a mental institution. Or the 20-year-old drug dealer with a juvenile felony adjudication who attempted to purchase a long gun in Arizona. These individuals would have never been discovered before the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. States agree with its efficacy, including Texas, which passed a law soon after the BSCA passed to ensure that juvenile mental health records would be available to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. This leads me to another important provision in the BSCA, which gives the Department of Justice tools to prosecute individuals for straw purchases. So, for example, if a drug dealer knows that his or her criminal conviction would disqualify them from purchasing a firearm legally, they can't get their boyfriend or girlfriend to buy it for them without violating the law. Straw purchases are the primary way that criminals and illegal aliens arm themselves, and the Trump administration has used these new criminal provisions enacted in the BSC to target cartel members. Ryan Ruth, who made an attempt against President Trump's life at Trump International Golf Course in September of 2024, acquired a gun via a straw purchase because his prior criminal record would have prevented him from buying it legally. Before BSCA, the only penalty a criminal faced for a straw purchase was lying on their firearms transaction, a minor offense which many prosecutors would not bother to pursue. The BSCA also created a new firearms trafficking law. Since drug cartel members can't legally purchase firearms, they rely on firearms traffickers to arm them and carry out their violence. Now, because of this law, the Department of Justice has a tool to combat cartel violence and prosecute individuals who engage in firearms trafficking. Indeed, the Department of Justice has convicted 459 criminals under the straw purchasing and firearms trafficking law, 459, while another 716 violent criminals are currently facing charges under this law. So, Mr. President, we all want our communities to be safe, but we also want to make sure that we respect the rights of law-abiding citizens. And no law we would pass restricting the rights of law-abiding citizens were we to do so would make a difference. No law-abiding citizen is a threat to their community. But this is one of the reasons why I was a vocal critic of President Biden's open border policies, which allowed millions of people to come into the country, including criminals, some criminals and cartel members. It's a reason why I opposed the defund the police movement that left a wave of unchecked violence crime in America's blue cities. And that's why, working together with Senator Tillis, Senator Sinema, and Senator Murphy, we made sure we passed a law which actually would invest in mental health resources to identify individuals who were suffering before they became a danger to themselves and others. We literally made the single largest investment when we passed this law 4 years ago on community-based mental health care and made our schools safer for all of our children so they can focus on why they are in school in the first place, to learn. And parents don't have to worry at home about, is my son or my daughter going to be safe? All the while protecting the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. So as I reflect back on my time here in the United States Senate, there are a few legislative accomplishments I've made that have helped the people of Texas and our country at large. At least I hope that's the case. But out of all of these, the BSCA was one of the most critical in tangibly making the country safer for families and children. Parents may not know when they interact with security systems at the entrance of their child's preschool that they are actually benefiting from this law. But the BSCA has made a difference, and it will continue to do so. So I'm proud, working together with Senator Tillis and Senator Sinema and Senator Murphy, that we were able to accomplish this, even in the face of organized opposition. What I did learn, and maybe shouldn't have been a surprise to me, is that there are cottage industries in Washington, D.C. that spread misinformation about legislation that's actually challenging to pass because it does involve something like a constitutional right, the Second Amendment, but strictly they do it for the purposes of raising money from their membership or using in political campaigns. But the one reason we're here in the Senate, the one reason I'm proud to be here is because we are willing to take on some of these hard, complex issues on occasion and to try to come up with tangible results that benefit our constituents and all the American people. So I'll yield it to Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. Senator Cornyn, I would describe as probably the ultimate statesman and gentleman here in the Senate. I'm not. So Senator Cornyn talked about all the merits of the bill, and we stand by them. I should also say he should get special credit for a lot of those provisions because they're in there because of his participation. I've long said, Mr. President, that I don't hold grudges, but I settle scores. And today is a good day to settle the score on another anniversary of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. We had a lot of people, actually organizations I'd been a member of in the past, spread a lot of false information about this bill. They said it was going to be a red flag bill. Well, the fact of the matter is there is funding in this bill for states that have implemented red flag laws. Here's a little secret. not even Republican red flag states satisfy our rigorous standards for due process, which is why they haven't applied for any funding. They wouldn't qualify for it unless they changed their plans. So this didn't cause a wave of red state laws to be implemented. Quite the contrary, it provided resources in behavioral health and veterans courts and drug courts and family courts to help people that may be in crisis ahead of that. Those same people who are saying, send money now, support us because we're defending your Second Amendment right. I should mention, as Speaker of the House, we expanded concealed carry rights in North Carolina at levels that people couldn't imagine. I'm a concealed carry permittee. I have more than one gun. But I'm a responsible gun owner who also finished the concealed carry class and also hunter safety. And I think we all need to be responsible gun owners. But at the end of the day, you got to decide whether or not a kid going into a gun store on their 18th birthday, if that's their day to buy a gun. So let's talk a little bit about what this bill really does versus what the mercenaries were trying to do to raise money and kill this bill. All we're saying, show of hands, do we have any pages that are 18 years old? Okay. Younger or older? Younger, okay. So these kids right now, whatever they're doing, these young adults, right now, whatever they're doing, if they got a committal, a behavioral health committal, if they assaulted a police officer, shot at one, got prosecuted for it, when they were 16 and a half years old or 17 years old, on their 18th birthday, it's like that device in what was it, Men in Black, where you erase that. Can you imagine that? If you were 18 years old on your birthday and you'd been convicted of a crime or had a serious legal entanglement, when you'd go to the NICS system, it was as if you were a day old. Does anybody think that really makes sense? That the crime you committed a couple of months, let's say a month, 60 days, 90 days earlier, would have not been relevant. That's absurd. Of course, if you're under 21, we need to have some insight into what your life looked like when you were 16 or 17 years old. That's what the enhanced background check was. And yet some of these gun advocacy organizations thought that was horrible. It was going to lead to a mass confiscation of guns. It was a back door, I think. It was a back door into just taking all of our guns away. It was going to devastate the Second Amendment protections in our Constitution. I heard them all saying it, saved some of it. Let me tell you what actually happened. All we did was say, if you're under 21, we're going to try and find out as much as we need to know about you for your safety and for the safety of your community. So all we did was say, we're going to go to local law enforcement. We're going to try and get information out there and encourage states to provide the information to our National Center for Clearing Gun Purchases in West Virginia sooner so that those who do not have a bad record can get their gun purchased sooner. So that we can, in a matter of 3 to 10 days, get this done. All the people that were opposed to this bill said this was just going to, that we were not going to get any approvals done, that even the good law-abiding over 21s were going to get swept into this somehow. Well, let me tell you what's happened since June of this year. NICS system's doing just fine. About 4,000 people were going to be denied based on the law, have been denied. So look at these numbers again. Talk about mass confiscation, how disruptive this was, how nobody's going to be able to get guns, right? That's what all the people said, send money. We're defending your Second Amendment right here in Washington. Almost 551,000 transactions for purchasing guns have been processed as of June of this year. About 3,800 of them were denied for reasons that existed before we ever passed this law. What we've done, though, is found some 1,630 young people that was not their day to buy a gun, Mr. President. That was, I could go through a long list. I could talk about people being convicted of assaulting a police officer. I could talk about people who had a long gun after they'd been convicted of a crime in their car. I could talk about people who accidentally in North Carolina shot their girlfriend a year before and all of a sudden wanted to go get, at 17 and wanted to get a gun. Does anybody in their right mind think that that's a good day for that kid to get a gun? I'm not talking about 38-year-old person going in. I'm talking about an 18-year-old. I'm talking about a 19-year-old. I'm talking about a 20-year-old. All we did was say, guys, let's make sure that this is a safe decision for the child and for the community. That's what this bill did. And that's why this bill has withstood the test of time, and not one scintilla, and I would defy anybody who was against this bill to find one of the things that they predicted and guaranteed would happen have actually occurred. What's happened is we may have saved 1,600 people who may have been buying that gun to hurt themselves. Maybe to hurt their community, maybe not. But what we know is that day was not the day that we should allow them to leave that gun store with a weapon for their safety and the safety of the community. This is Congress at its best. It's looking at the people that you generally support, and Senator Cornyn was first among them, and the gun rights community, and saying, guys, I can't take the top line arguments against this because you all know it's not really true. It's this black and white world that we live in here that very seldom impactful language and legislation like the Safer Communities Act ever get done, because people get afraid of the noise and they back into their corners. And I want to give Senator Cornyn an enormous amount of credit for stepping up and doing what he did to make Texas safer, make the country safer, and make these people and their loved ones and their neighbors in the community safer. The last thing I'll leave you with is to the states that do have red flag laws, including, I believe, the state from the presiding officer. Let's get those red flag laws consistent with due process and show respect to gun owners, because I'm not aware of any red flag law, even in red states, that come close to the sorts of protections that we also put into this bill. So let's give them an incentive to get it right. Let's make sure that every law-abiding citizen who wants to have a gun can, like me and like Senator Cornyn and like so many other people. But let's be smart about it. And let's make sure that we continue this trend of being sure that when a person applies for a weapon, that they can safely own it, they're going to be safe for themselves and their community, and stop this nonsense of fearing any sort of positive change because of political repercussions. This bill is one of the best bills that I had the privilege to work on. And the thing that's amazing about this bill is it went from concept to implementation in fewer than 6 weeks. That's what happens when Congress gets together. They set aside their partisan differences. They refuse to listen to the false information trying to kill a bill, and they do something good for their state and their country. And that's exactly on this anniversary of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act what we accomplished. And I want to thank Senator Cornyn for his partnership. It was not an easy bill, but it was a lot of work, but we got it done. And Senator Murphy, and I should have mentioned Senator Gillibrand, or not Gillibrand, wrong Kirsten, Senator Sinema, working together. I mean, we had people across the political spectrum, folks. Chris Murphy, I consider a friend and colleague, about as liberal as anybody in this chamber. I think he would admit that. And we got John Cornyn, who's one of the most conservative. And then you got me and Sinema probably somewhere in the middle. But we got together and we got this done, and there are more people safe. And I believe there are people alive today that may not have been if this bill hadn't passed. So Senator Cornyn, I appreciate the work that you did on this bill. I believe we've got something that we should be proud of. And I also believe, Senator Cornyn, that the straw purchases, the gun trafficking, all the other things that we didn't spend a lot of time on, we can come down here and do a colloquy and just talk about more and more of the positive aspects of this bill. And I appreciate your leadership in moving it.
Mr. President, I just want to say there's one thing that Senator Tillis said I disagree with, and that is that he said he's not a statesman. He is. And it took a lot of political courage to do something that we knew we were buying trouble, because we knew that this is can be such an emotional issue and so easy to mislead people about what the facts are, that we knew that there would be a political price to be paid in order to take on this challenge. But one of the things that I think, as we're talking about the harm of a young person who's suffering from mental illness or with a criminal record, a juvenile record of that, I'm sure you're aware of this, but I just happened to double check. The Pew poll says that 62% of the gun deaths in America are suicides. These are people, perhaps a young, disturbed young person who's suffering mental problems, who actually then use that gun to kill themselves or harm themselves. Has that been your
That's exactly
experience?
right. If you take a look at the, I spent a lot of time in focus on behavioral health, Senator Cornyn, and the data is compelling. There's no question in my mind, just the sheer number here. There's no question in my mind that we saved the life of somebody who was buying a gun for that purpose. No doubt in my mind, the numbers stipulate that.
And one of the things that I learned back years ago when I had a protective detail, when I was the whip, is my Capitol police officer said there is this phenomenon which I never fully appreciated before. If you think about it, some of these mass shootings are actually an act of suicide themselves, because these shooters go into these situations knowing, or likely knowing, that they'll never make their way out of it, but they don't have the courage to take their own life. They need to take other people down with them. And there is a phenomenon called death by cop, where they know that by engaging a law enforcement officer that they ultimately will be killed of necessity by the law enforcement officer to prevent causing more harm. But I want to ask just one last question. Are you aware, has anybody contacted your office, or have you read anything in the press or seen anything on broadcast media that would indicate that a single law-abiding American has been denied access to their Second Amendment rights because of this law?
No, quite the contrary. That's why I'm saying, look, I love saying I told you so. And I believe that that was going to be the case here. But Senator Cornyn, let me just say it for anybody, for the 20 people watching on C-SPAN, and hopefully some will cover our statements. I defy anybody, anyone who opposed this bill, who scored it, who threatened members to vote against it. I defy them to come to my office and find one example of what they were telling people to oppose this bill that actually came to pass. One, here it is. Public challenge. Guys, you were out there, you were emailing, you were raising money, you were saying world's going to end, guns are going to be confiscated, that straw purchase was going to destroy, that we weren't going after trafficking, we were going after law-abiding officers, and their licenses were going to be expanded. All these things, all this noise. I will dedicate an hour to somebody who wants to come into my office and prove to me one negative behavior by any state or local government or federal government has occurred. This is what happened, folks. But you want to come to my office, I'll guarantee you, you refer to this C-SPAN segment and you want to come to my office and prove that something bad happened, I'll take that. My guess is I'll get that hour back. And that's what I mean. At some point on these tough issues, we keep kicking the can down the road because we let people off the hook for saying things that are patently untrue and then not holding them to account a year or two later. Well, I'm here to tell you, I'm here for the next 173 days before I retire. Anybody who wants to come in and prove one bad outcome from this bill, give me a call. And Senator Cornyn, again, you and I are both, we're both here for another 173 days. And I say that not because I'm counting the days to leave, but I'm counting the number of days that we have to make an impact. And I hope I can continue to work with you on this and other bills to even make it better. We are unabashedly, unapologetically pro-Second Amendment Republicans. But we're smart about it, and we have the courage to step up when we see a change can be made that will keep us true to those values, but also keep our communities safer. And I appreciate your leadership on this.
As I do yours. Mr. President, we yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Louisiana.
I rise, as so many others have, to give tribute to Senator Lindsey Graham. Lindsey was effective as a senator in large part because he was so well-liked by colleagues and because he liked them in return. He was affable, always willing to work with others, regardless of how different backgrounds, beliefs, and positions were. He just focused on getting things done and had the courage to take on issues that others would not. We collaborated on something called Graham Cassidy, a bill which would have replaced Obamacare with coverage for everyone, literally everyone, but at a lower cost than the Affordable Care Act. I always chuckle when I say the Affordable Care Act. And we were a good team because we complemented each other. I was a doctor always thinking about health care. He was the politician's politician. He told me, Bill, you're good at policy, but you're a terrible politician. And I would say that many people knew exactly what he was talking about. At one point, I was talking to him about health care. He goes, Bill, don't talk to me about policy. It gives me headaches. But he said he'd fight to get it passed. We came up short, but not because he did not and I did not fight. Once he said, I'm going to go on Fox Morning. If I go on Fox Morning, I know the president's watching. And if the president's watching on a Fox Morning show and I say we should be fighting to replace Obamacare, it'll get the president engaged. He just knew how to find that audience that was important. He knew how to speak to them. He had a great sense of humor, and again, he knew how to get things done. Ultimately, that's why somebody comes to Washington. Some people come to Washington to be a senator. Others come to Washington to do something as a senator. Lindsey was someone who came to Washington to do something as a senator. I speak for myself, but I echo what colleagues have said. Lindsey Graham shall be missed. Mr. President, I yield the floor for the moment. My office to be granted floor privileges until July 15, 2026. Mason Lamb and Harper Alsbach.
Without objection.
Thank you.
The senator from Louisiana.
I ask that this be entered as a separate entry from my
Without
last
objection.
Mr. President, we've got to do something about health care. Now, I'm a physician. You might think of course, Bill cares about it. I can tell you who cares about it is the American people. I was with an Uber driver last night. What do you think, if you were the president, Uber driver, what would you be talking about right now? She goes, I can't afford things. I can't afford my gas. I can't afford my groceries, my housing. I can't afford my health care. Now, that's been echoed. And in fact, what we're seeing is that the inability to afford health care is impacting the ability of small businesses to provide health insurance for their employees. The employer-based health insurance system is the most dominant form of providing health insurance for those less than 65, and it is crumbling. The percentage of working-age adults getting health coverage from a job has decreased from 67%, about 25 years ago, to about 60% now. And the reason why is that premiums are going up so much, particularly for those 62% of Americans who get their insurance from a small business. There's a recent article in Stat, which based upon federal government information, that if you look at inflation since about 1985, that premiums should have risen about 176%. But they've actually risen over 1,000, almost 1,100% higher than they should have. If you put it this way, if they should have risen 176%, they've actually risen about 1,100%. These are premiums. Now, by the way, these premiums continue to rise after the passage of the Affordable Care Act. Indeed, the rise became higher, faster, after the passage of the Affordable Care Act. And so if you're a small business, you're trying to make ends meet, businesses contribute to the health insurance of their employees. Typically, they may employ, it depends upon the business, but they may give 100%, they may give 80%, they may give 60%, but whatever percent that the small business is contributing to their employee is going up. The other thing to recognize is that when it begins to rise too much, then the employer pays less and less for the employee's health insurance. This can be manifested in a couple ways. Instead of paying 80% of the cost of the policy, they may pay only 60%. Or the small business may decide to get a less expensive policy, in which case they increase the deductible. Now, the deductible is what we pay out of pocket before the insurance kicks in. That's the problem. And so if you look at since about 2000, the amount of deductible at a big business is about $1,700. At a small business, for a single worker, among workers with the deductible, it's now about $2,600. So before the insurance begins to work for the employee, they have to come up with, on average, $2,600 to pay before the insurance kicks in. Now, that may be something like a routine visit, which is covered. They may have preventive care covered, like a mammogram or a colonoscopy, a screening colonoscopy. But typically, they've got to put up $2,600 on average if they go to the emergency room after a car wreck. And only then does the insurance begin to kick in. Now, why is that important? Because most families have less than $500 of cash in order to pay for their health care. In previous speeches, I've talked about how people are putting their health care expenditures on their credit card. And that credit card debt factors in to 60% of household bankruptcies. So they got a $3,000 deductible. They don't have the money in their bank account. Their child gets sick, they bring him to the emergency room. They don't have the $3,000, so they put it on the credit card. And that credit card debt mounts. Indeed, if you look at the percent of income that Americans are now paying upon credit card interest, which means that they are carrying a balance, has risen from about 1% to, was it 3.2%? To 3.2%. 3.2% of their income going to pay for interest on credit cards. This shows that they're rolling these big credit card balances forward. So with credit card balances not paid, but being the minimal amount being paid of up to $10,000. Much of this relates back to how do you pay for health care? I don't have the money in my account, so I'm going to use my credit card in order to pay for these large deductibles. Well, I've got a way to address that, Mr. President. We call it the MVP Act. Under our plan, we would give an advance income tax credit to the family, on average for a family of four, about $2,000. That would go into an account that they could use to pay for their benefits. Now, and by the way, this is paid for, but they would pre-fund a health savings account. Now, we don't give it to the insurance company Because if you give the money to the insurance company to subsidize premiums, the insurance company takes 20% of it for overhead and for profit. You give it to the individual, her family, and they're going to use 100% of it for the health care that they need. Now, we couple that, so it's money in your pocket. We couple that by adding value. Price transparency, so that the family knows the price they pay before they go in for the service. That can be powerful. I was up here in D.C. once. Actually, I remember we were having a crawfish boil. And every year, Louisiana people have a crawfish boil. And there's a woman who saw me on the street. She stopped me and said, "Hey, Dr. Cassidy." I said, "Yes." She goes, "I'm from Texas, but I saw you gave a speech about price transparency, and that if I paid cash, it would be cheaper than if I went through my insurance." So the doctor ordered an MRI on my son's shoulder, and they told me it was going to cost $2,000. Well, my deductible was whatever it was, say $1,000. So I said, "How much if I pay you cash?" They said, "Well, if you pay us cash, it's only $600. In this case, paying cash was cheaper than paying her deductible. So if you have price transparency, if you say, "Wait a second, I'm going to have at least $1,000 out of pocket because of my deductible, but if I paid cash right now and don't go through my insurance, it only costs me $600, you're going to bring value to the patient." In this transaction, under the MVP plan, there would have been money placed into her health savings account. She could have used, in this case, she did it on her own, price transparency to find out the price, so money and value for the patients. We take the power away from the middlemen, the power away from the insurance company to approve or disapprove of the care that the patient knows that she needs, and instead we give the money directly to her with the tools of price transparency to bring value to the patient. Now, we're making steps on this. Right now in the HELP Committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, of which I am the chair, we are working on price transparency legislation. We hope to get that passed in the next 2 weeks out of committee, and we hope this passes on the floor of the Senate. How do we bring value to the patient by bringing the power of price transparency as she chooses what health care and where to get her health care? Now, we can get this done. Whenever there's a big idea like this, how do we actually help the American people with affordability? How do we actually put money in their pocket and couple it with tools that would give them the power of price transparency in order to bring money in their pocket and value for the patient? People say, "Oh, that's too big. Can't get that done." No way. But I will remind folks, we've actually achieved a lot on health care in the last few years. The No Surprises Act blocks about 1 million surprise medical bills per month for the American people. A PBM reform bill, which was signed into law by President Trump a few months ago, but that was negotiated by Congress, and it was tough. But we actually got it so that the value to the patient in terms of lower drug prices, if you will, cutting out or restricting the activities of the insurance company in the middle, we got that through. The administration is working on Trump RX, which allows patients to buy drugs without hidden cost. So if we're going to make health care more affordable for the American people, we've got to build upon that record, and we have to work together. So my challenge is to the Senate, to the House, and to the President. Let's come together. Let's get things done. Let's work for the American people. Ask any Uber driver, ask our constituents, what's the biggest issue right now, and they will say affording life. Affording life means to be able to afford health care. And Mr. President, with the MVP health agenda, we help our constituents afford health care. With that, I yield.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 738.
Questions on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Cara Marie Westerkamp of Virginia to be a judge of the United States Court of International Trade.
Mr. President, I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Cara Marie Westerkamp of Virginia to be a judge of the United States Court of International Trade, signed by 17 senators, as follows.
Mr. President, I ask consent to reading the names be waived.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The Senator from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've come to the floor several times over the last year to warn the looming threat about Islam infiltrating the United States of America. You know, I know there are people that sometimes roll their eyes when I talk about this, but I express serious concerns about what Islam teaches and how it's incompatible with our Judeo-Christian values. This is why I say that Islam is not a religion, it's a death cult. Don't believe me, just look at the report that came out recently in the United Kingdom. This report, which I have a picture of behind me, made international news, the Rape Gang Inquiry Report. This report, which I have a picture, this isn't a flimsy report. It was introduced into Parliament by Rupert Lowe, who had a successful career in finance before running for Parliament in 2024. It also co-sponsored by 5 other members of the UK Parliament. The explosive report says that Muslim rape gangs are operating in over 40% of the United Kingdom. The report details how white British girls are being trafficked and exploited by Muslim men across the United Kingdom. The report claims that there have been at least 250,000 victims who have been trafficked by these third world Muslim immigrants. You know, the report describes a consistent pattern for the Muslim rape gangs. Girls as young as 11 were groomed with gifts, alcohol, and drugs. They were picked up from schools, from care homes, and subjected to gang rape, trafficking, torture, forced Islamic conversion, and lifetime trauma. These are some of the worst things that you can possibly imagine and really make you sick at your stomach. But it's real, and it's happening to hundreds of thousands of young women across Europe. The report states that roughly 87% of those convicted in the child sexual exploitation cases bore distinctive Muslim names. Surprise, surprise. That's because these heinous acts are acceptable and even encouraged under the teaching of Islam. Islam teaches that Muslims are superior to non-believers and enables Muslim men to treat non-Muslim girls as property available for sexual abuse. The doctrine of Muslim superiority is drawn from documents written by Muhammad, which clearly state that Muslims are superior and have a duty to correct non-believers. For example, in one part of the Quran, it says that Muslims are the best of people in humanity as long as they maintain faith in Allah. At the same time, Muslims are taught to be hostile towards non-Muslims. In addition, Muhammad taught his followers that men are superior to women, men can marry women without consent as young as 6 years old, and men can sexually abuse and rape non-Muslim women. It's their right, they think. Where is the outrage from the so-called feminist groups on this issue. They're nowhere to be found, unfortunately. The report goes on to say that there was a deliberate failure in the United Kingdom to protect victims or to stop this from happening. Police discouraged reporting, destroyed evidence, and sometimes even shielded the evil men who were doing this to young women. The National Health Service discharged victims without making sure that they had a safe place to go home to. Schools included victims rather than protecting them. Taxi license authorities renewed permits for drivers without bothering to check if they were involved in any of the trafficking of victims. The major political parties, along with the UK government, willingly turned a blind eye to the blatant sex trafficking happening right under their noses, all in the name of being politically correct. Let me be clear about this. By refusing to address Islamic sex trafficking of hundreds of thousands of innocent girls, the UK government enabled these sick criminals. Folks, Europe is gone. Just go over there and visit. They've fallen victim to mass migration, which is wiping out the culture, identity, security, and foundation of their countries. Did you know that the number one most popular name of baby boys born in the United Kingdom now is Mohammed? And it's been that way for 3 years. You'd think it would be Charles after the king, William after the next in line of the throne. No, it's not. The millions of Muslims who have moved to the UK are having babies, and they're naming them after the most popular figure, which now is in Europe, which is Mohammed. This is a takeover, a hostile takeover. And I've said this many times, Europeans have the right to fight back in the streets to take their countries. They got to fight back. We saw an example this last week in Scotland. A Scottish man took matters into his own hands when he reached a breaking point. He knew his government sold him out. There was no one to protect him or his family from violence from these third world Muslim migrants. It wasn't there. There was no protection. So to be clear, I'm not advocating for violence, but this will soon be the reality in every European country if they don't start sending foreigners back to their home countries as soon as they possibly can, ASAP. When a government imports millions of third world Muslims who refuse to assimilate and actively they want to destroy any semblance of the Western civilization, people are going to start taking matters into their own hands. That's what usually happens. You know, I wish I could say that the United States is immune to such dangers, but sadly, what's happening in Europe is a foreshadowing of what's to come here in our own backyard if we're not careful. Under the Obama and Biden administration, third world Muslims flooded America. American cities like Minneapolis, Dearborn, Michigan, and parts of Virginia with one goal in mind. One goal: to radically change the ethnic, religious, and political makeup of our country, the United States of America. That's their plan. They're doing it in Europe, now they're coming here. Thanks to Barack Obama and Joe Biden, the enemy, folks, is now inside the gates. You'd have to be stupid to think that what's happening in Europe couldn't happen here. Oh, it can't happen in the United States. It's happening as we speak. The same cult ideology that empowered human trafficking of white women in the United Kingdom is alive and well here in the United States of America. In the 1980s, the Muslim Brotherhood created a blueprint known as the Project, outlining a long-term plan to establish Islamic dominance worldwide by infiltrating Western institutions. That is their plan. The project explicitly instructs Muslims to create parallel societies within their host countries and to reject all assimilation into Western culture. Since 1986, Herndon, Virginia, not too far from here, has been the home to the International Institute of Islamic Thought. Think about that, just down the road. This institute was established with the sole purpose of eliminating Western influence in every field of human knowledge. We're talking science, we're talking history, psychology, and politics. Then they would rebuild it. They're changing it from an Islamic viewpoint. It's not our viewpoint. It's not our history. Simply put, they're taking advantage of our laws and ultimately destroying our country. In short, the project outlines a long-term plan to establish Islamic dominance worldwide by infiltrating and eventually take control of the nation that they're in. This document is operational, and it has a manual that has guided Muslim Brotherhood networks for several decades. It isn't just getting here, it's been around a long time. You're seeing parts of their plan play out today in several states like Texas, Minnesota, New Jersey, and New York. You know, even my state of Alabama is becoming a focal point of the Islamic network's goal to destroy Christianity and to eliminate Western society. The Rare Foundation recently uncovered some disturbing facts about the Birmingham Islamic Society in my state. This so-called Islamic society admits to being 100% rooted in Sharia law. It's got ties to North American Islamic Trust, which is linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. Rare Foundation's research also claims that Birmingham's Islamic Society has employed imams with direct ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. The mosque constitution reveals that every aspect of the mosque operations, memberships, finances, and even personal affairs of its members are subject to Sharia law. The Birmingham Islamic Society's constitution declares Sharia to be the supreme authority over the entire organization. To them, Sharia law has and overrules all of our federal laws, state and local. I know the state of Alabama has passed a law to prohibit state courts from enforcing or considering any foreign, international, or religious law if it violates the U.S. or Alabama Constitution. I trust the Alabama courts will look into this as soon as possible in Birmingham. You know, I've talked many times about how Sharia law is fundamentally incompatible with our Constitution and our society. It has no place in the United States. We're living in a dangerous time where people are afraid to say the truth because they don't want to be canceled or talked about. Bad things start to happen when good people sit idly by and do nothing to address the problems that are plaguing our society today. We can't stay silent. If we do that, we're no better than the leaders of the UK who sat on their hands while 250,000 young girls were raped and trafficked. 250,000. What's wrong with these people? Raped and trafficked just over the last few years. For too long, people have tiptoed around the issue, afraid to hurt somebody's dang feelings or make somebody uncomfortable. But the time for being politically correct, it better be over. The truth is that radical Islam extremists want every single freedom-loving American to convert to Islam or be killed by the sword. That's what they study and believe. Thanks to President Trump, our borders are secure and we're stopping mass migration and turning away people who want to hurt our country. And we've got them here already. This action is saving our country right now, but it only takes the next Democrat communist president to reopen the floodgates to mass immigration. The disease of Islam has been allowed to fester and spread in our country for a long time. The mullahs are just waiting until they're in the majority to take our country and force Sharia law on everybody that lives in the United States of America. Folks, it's coming. So the question is, will we continue this path and end up like the UK and the rest of the European countries, or will we say enough is enough and refuse to give up our country to the enemy? I was glad to see President Trump officially designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. But that's not quite enough. I'm calling on President Trump to ban Muslim Brotherhood from this country. They don't need to be here. They're our enemies. They're inside the gates. We also need to ban Sharia law on a federal level, not just state levels. This hateful, murderous ideology has no place in our country, and it is growing, and we're not saying anything about it. It doesn't need to be here now. It doesn't need to be here ever. We better wake up. Mr. President, I yield the floor.